Daniel had never imagined his life would turn out this way. He was once a man full of dreams, someone who believed he could give his family everything they ever needed. But life often had its own plans, and not all of them were kind. Years ago, he had been a husband, a worker with a steady job, and a father who looked forward to the future. But things changed when his wife passed away unexpectedly, leaving him alone with his little boy, Sam. From that moment, the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. He was no longer just a father. He had to be both mother and father, provider and caretaker, comforter and teacher. The small town where Daniel and Sam lived was quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's story. People whispered about Daniel sometimes, not out of cruelty but out of pity. They knew how hard he worked, how he picked up small jobs just to make ends meet. Some days he would fix fences for neighbors. Other days he carried boxes at the local store or painted old sheds for a few extra dollars. Whatever the task, he accepted it because every coin mattered. Despite the struggles, Daniel always put Sam first. He made sure his son had food to eat, clothes to wear, and a smile on his face. Many nights, after long hours of labor, Daniel would sit at the small wooden table in their rented room, helping Sam with homework under the dim light of a single bulb. His body would ache and his hands would be rough and tired, but his heart found peace in knowing that Sam was learning, growing, and dreaming. Sam was a bright boy, curious about everything. He often asked questions about the stars, about birds, about why people had to work so hard. Daniel never had all the answers, but he always tried to give his son hope. "Hard work never goes to waste," he would say softly. "One day all this effort will mean something. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day." Sam believed him because to him his father was the strongest man in the world. But even the strongest man has moments of doubt. Sometimes late at night when Sam was asleep, Daniel would sit by the window and wonder if he was doing enough. He thought about the bills, the rising rent, the broken shoes that needed replacing, and the meals that sometimes had to be stretched thinner than he wished. He prayed quietly, asking for strength not for himself, but for his son's future. One chilly morning, as Daniel was walking through town after finishing a small repair job, he overheard two men talking about an abandoned cabin on the edge of the woods. The old place had been left to rot for years, and now the owner wanted to get rid of it for almost nothing, just $50. The men laughed about it, saying it was a waste of money, nothing but a pile of broken wood and dust. But to Daniel, the words sparked something. He went to see the cabin himself. It was worse than he expected. The roof sagged, the windows were shattered, and the walls were covered in years of dirt and weather. Grass grew wild around it, and the door hung crookedly from rusty hinges. Most people would have walked away, but Daniel stood there with his hands in his pockets, imagining what it could become. He didn't see just the broken wood. He saw a place where he and Sam could finally call home. They wouldn't have to keep moving from one rented room to another. They wouldn't have to worry about the landlord raising the rent. It wouldn't be much at first, but it would be theirs. That night, he told Sam about the cabin. The boy's eyes widened with excitement. "A real house of our own?" he asked eagerly. Daniel nodded with a smile, though inside he wondered if he was making the right choice. $50 was not a small amount for them. It was almost all the money he had saved, money he had planned to use for emergencies. But deep in his heart, he felt it was time to take a chance. The next day, Daniel handed over the money and signed the papers. The cabin was now his. When he brought Sam there for the first time, the boy ran through the broken doorway, laughing as if it was a palace. "This is ours, Dad," Sam shouted, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. Daniel smiled, watching his son's joy. For him, that moment alone was worth more than $50. The first few days in the cabin were not easy. They had no proper furniture, only a couple of old mattresses and a small table. Rain leaked through the roof and the wind whistled through the cracks. But every problem became a project for them to work on together. In the evenings, Daniel taught Sam how to hammer nails, how to sweep the dust, and how to patch small holes. Sam loved helping even though the work was tiring. To him, it felt like an adventure, like building a secret hideout in the forest. Neighbors who passed by shook their heads. They thought Daniel was wasting his energy. Some even offered him old tools or scraps of wood, pitying his situation. But Daniel did not care about what others thought. He only cared about the sparkle in Sam's eyes every time they fixed something together. The cabin was no longer just broken walls and rotten wood. It was becoming a symbol of their resilience. Sometimes when they took breaks, Daniel and Sam would sit on the steps of the cabin, drinking water and talking about their dreams. Sam said he wanted to be someone important one day, someone who could make life easier for his dad. Daniel, with a gentle smile, told him he already was important. "You give me strength every day," he said. "Without you, I would have given up a long time ago." Sam leaned against him, feeling safe in his father's words. The nights in the cabin were cold, but they wrapped themselves in blankets and told stories until they fell asleep. Sam liked to imagine the cabin's past, wondering who had lived there before. Daniel would listen and smile, thinking how his son's imagination made even the darkest nights feel lighter. Though the cabin was still far from perfect, it gave Daniel a new sense of purpose. He no longer felt like he was just surviving. He was building something. Each nail hammered, each board repaired, was a step toward a better life. He knew the journey would be long and there would be more struggles ahead, but he also knew that as long as he and Sam worked together, they could face anything. And so, what began as a poor man's desperate choice slowly turned into a story of hope. Daniel had bought a ruined cabin for $50, but to him, it was worth more than gold. It was a place where his son could laugh freely, where they could dream without fear, and where love could turn even the most broken walls into a home. The cabin looked more like a broken shell than a home, but Daniel and Sam refused to let that discourage them. On the very first morning after moving in, they woke up to the sound of birds singing outside the cracked window. The air smelled of damp wood and earth, and the floor creaked with every step. Dust floated in the sunlight, making the room look like it was filled with tiny golden specks. Sam rubbed his sleepy eyes, then smiled as he remembered where he was. This was their cabin, their place, even if it was falling apart. Daniel got up and stretched his tired back. He looked around the room, and though others would see ruin, he saw possibility. The roof leaked, the walls were fragile, and the windows had no glass, but to him it was a blank canvas. He turned to Sam, who was already jumping excitedly on the mattress. "Ready to start our work?" Daniel asked with a grin. Sam nodded so hard his messy hair bounced. They began with the easiest tasks. Daniel handed his son a broom that was almost too big for him, and together they swept piles of dust and leaves out the door. Every stroke of the broom revealed a little more of the wooden floor beneath, and Sam treated it like a treasure hunt. "Look, Dad, the floor is still strong here," he shouted proudly as he uncovered a clean patch of wood. Daniel laughed, encouraged by his son's excitement. The cabin quickly became a place of laughter despite its broken state. Whenever they discovered a strange old nail or a faded piece of wallpaper clinging to the walls, Sam made up stories about the people who had once lived there. He imagined an old man sitting by a fire, a family eating soup together at a wooden table, or children like him running around the small rooms. Daniel listened to these stories while hammering loose boards back in place. In those moments, the cabin didn't feel ruined. It felt alive again, filled with imagination and hope. They worked during the day, and at night they rested on their mattresses, listening to the wind howl through the cracks. Sometimes the sound was so loud that it felt like the whole cabin would fall apart. Daniel would wrap a blanket around Sam and whisper that everything was fine. He told him that the cabin was strong, stronger than it looked, just like them. Sam would close his eyes, trusting his father's words, and soon drift to sleep. As the days passed, the father and son formed a routine. Daniel worked small jobs in town to earn a little money for food and supplies, and in the evenings he returned to the cabin to continue fixing it. Sam, after finishing schoolwork, waited eagerly for his father so they could start their little projects. They patched holes with scraps of wood, cleaned corners filled with cobwebs, and even made curtains out of old cloth to cover the windows. Neighbors sometimes walked past the cabin and shook their heads. To them, it still looked like a hopeless wreck. One man even said, "You'd be better off tearing it down." But Daniel only smiled and said nothing. He wasn't fixing the cabin for appearances. He was fixing it because it gave him and his son purpose. Each nail he drove into the wood was like a promise to Sam that things would get better. One evening, after a long day of cleaning, Daniel and Sam sat on the steps outside the cabin, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, and the birds were quieting down for the night. Sam leaned against his father and whispered, "Do you think our cabin will ever be beautiful?" Daniel put his arm around his son and replied gently, "It already is. Beauty doesn't come from perfect walls or shiny windows. It comes from the love we put inside these walls. Sam smiled at his father's words, feeling proud to be part of their project. Life was not easy, but there was a kind of joy in their struggles. The cabin became more than a place to live. It was their adventure, their story being written day by day. Every corner they cleaned, every board they fixed was a chapter of determination. Sam loved telling his friends at school about how he and his dad were turning a broken cabin into a home. Most children didn't understand, but Sam didn't mind. He knew what it meant to him. One rainy afternoon, the roof began leaking heavily, dripping water onto their mattress. Instead of feeling defeated, Daniel turned it into a lesson for his son. He grabbed a bucket to catch the drops and said, "See, life is a little like this roof. Sometimes it leaks, sometimes it breaks, but if we keep fixing it patiently, it will hold together." Sam nodded thoughtfully, remembering those words. Together they climbed into the attic, covered in dust and spider webs, and tried to patch the holes with old sheets of tin and wood they had found nearby. It wasn't perfect, but it held enough to keep them dry. They laughed at their messy faces covered in dirt as if they were adventurers on a daring mission. Slowly, the cabin began to change. The floors no longer groaned as loudly. The rooms smelled less of rot and more of fresh air. They painted the walls with leftover paint given by a kind neighbor, mixing colors until the rooms looked cheerful. Sam proudly drew pictures of stars, birds, and trees, taping them to the walls as decorations. To anyone else, it was still a poor man's cabin. But to Daniel and Sam, it was a kingdom built with love. Sometimes, when Daniel felt exhausted, he would watch his son running around the cabin, chasing butterflies in the yard or laughing as he carried small pieces of wood. Those moments reminded him why he kept pushing forward. He wasn't just building a home. He was building memories, lessons, and a future. The cabin, once abandoned and forgotten, was becoming the heart of their lives. It taught them patience, teamwork, and gratitude. It showed them that even the most broken things could be repaired with enough care. And most of all, it reminded them that happiness wasn't found in wealth or luxury, but in simple moments shared with someone you love. Night after night, as they sat together by the dim light of a lantern, Daniel felt peace he hadn't known in years. His son's laughter echoed in the small rooms, making the cabin feel warm despite the cold outside. And deep inside, he began to believe that this ruined place, bought for only $50, was holding something greater than he could ever imagine. The rain had been falling all afternoon, tapping on the thin roof of the cabin like hundreds of tiny drums. The sound filled the room, steady and calm, as Daniel and Sam worked together to repair a loose floorboard near the corner of the main room. The cabin had grown warmer and brighter since they had started fixing it, but there were still many parts that needed attention. Daniel crouched down with his tools, carefully prying at the old wooden plank that had begun to rise from the floor. Sam knelt beside him, eager to help, holding a small hammer in his hands like a proud little worker. The floorboard was stubborn. It creaked and groaned as Daniel tried to lift it. "This wood is older than both of us put together," he said with a tired laugh. Sam giggled and tapped the board lightly, pretending to encourage it to move. "Come on, old wood," he whispered. "Let us fix you." Finally, with a strong push, the board lifted just enough for Daniel to slip his fingers under and pull it away. Sam leaned in close, his curious eyes sparkling. Beneath the floorboard was a dark space, a hollow pocket that looked deeper than either of them expected. Sam gasped. "Dad, look! There's something down there." At first, Daniel thought it was just dirt or maybe a broken pipe, but when he reached inside with his hand, he felt something solid and hard, unlike the soft earth. His fingers brushed against rough metal, cold even in the warm room. He paused, surprised, then slowly pulled out what looked like a rusty piece of iron. But it wasn't just a piece of iron. It was part of a lock, attached to an old wooden chest. The chest was small, about the size of a suitcase, but heavy. It was covered in dust and rust, as if it had been hidden for decades. The wood was dark, with iron edges that had turned brown from age. Sam's eyes grew wide with excitement. "It's a treasure box," he exclaimed, his voice rising in wonder. Daniel felt his heart race, though he tried to stay calm. "It's probably just old tools or junk someone left behind," he said softly, not wanting his son to be disappointed. But deep inside, a spark of curiosity lit up. Why would anyone hide a chest under the floor of a cabin? Together, they pulled the chest out from its hiding place and set it in the middle of the room. The rain continued to fall outside, the steady rhythm making the moment feel even more unreal. Sam touched the rusty lock gently. "Can we open it?" he asked eagerly. Daniel examined the lock. It was old and fragile, barely holding together after so many years. With a careful tug and a little pressure from a screwdriver, the lock gave way with a soft snap. The chest creaked as Daniel lifted the lid, and for a moment both of them held their breath, unsure of what they would find. Inside, wrapped in old cloths, lay stacks of coins that glimmered faintly even in the dim light. Some were gold, some silver, each one worn but clearly valuable. There were also small pieces of jewelry, rings, bracelets, and necklaces delicately carved and shining despite the dust. At the very bottom lay a bundle of papers, yellowed with age but neatly tied together with string. Sam gasped so loudly that Daniel couldn't help but laugh at his son's amazement. "Dad, it really is treasure," he shouted, bouncing with joy. Daniel lifted one of the coins and turned it over in his hand, staring at the strange designs engraved on it. They didn't look like regular coins. They looked old, possibly very old. Daniel's heart pounded as he realized what this might mean. This wasn't just a box of forgotten trinkets. It could be something important, something valuable beyond anything they had ever known. But instead of rushing to conclusions, he stayed calm for Sam's sake. "We don't know yet," he said gently. "These might just be old keepsakes, but they do look special." Sam couldn't take his eyes off the jewelry. "Who do you think put it here? Why would they hide it?" he asked, his imagination already racing. Maybe it was pirates, or maybe a rich traveler who didn't want anyone to steal it. He clutched one of the coins like it was proof of his story. Daniel chuckled at his son's excitement but also wondered about the truth. The cabin had been abandoned for many years. Perhaps it once belonged to someone who had secrets, someone who never returned to claim what was theirs. They spent hours carefully examining the contents of the chest. Daniel laid everything out on the table, wiping the dust gently with a cloth. The jewelry sparkled faintly, catching the light of the lantern. The coins shone like little suns in Sam's hands. The papers, however, seemed even more mysterious. Some appeared to be letters written in elegant handwriting that was hard to read. Others looked like official documents with stamps and signatures. Daniel couldn't understand all of it, but he knew it was important. As night fell, the cabin seemed filled with magic. The rain had stopped, and the silence around them made the discovery feel even more profound. Sam refused to sleep at first, too excited about the treasure. He kept asking questions, his mind spinning with endless possibilities. "Do you think it's worth a lot of money? Do you think we're rich now? Can we buy a big house?" Daniel smiled and pulled the blanket over his son. "We don't know yet. But even if it's not worth much, today was special. We found something hidden, something no one else knew about. That's already a treasure." Sam eventually fell asleep with one of the old coins tucked safely under his pillow. Daniel stayed awake longer, sitting by the chest and staring at its contents. His heart was torn between disbelief and hope. Could it really be worth something? Could this strange discovery change their lives? He didn't want to dream too far ahead, but deep down he felt a sense of wonder he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, when the sunlight streamed through the cracks of the cabin, Sam ran straight to the chest as if afraid it had all been a dream. But it was still there. Every coin, every jewel, every paper, just as they had left it. Daniel promised his son that they would find out the truth. He would take the coins and documents to someone in town who could understand them better. For now, though, the secret was theirs alone. The ruined cabin, bought for only $50, had revealed a hidden story buried beneath its floors. And though neither of them yet knew its full value, they both sensed that their lives had just changed forever. That day, as they worked on repairing another part of the cabin, Sam couldn't stop smiling. Every nail he hammered, every board he lifted, he did so with a new excitement. The cabin wasn't just their home anymore, it was a mystery, a gift and a promise of something greater waiting to be discovered. Daniel, watching his son's joy, felt a quiet gratitude. For years, life had given them only struggles. Now, for the first time, it had given them a miracle. The morning after their discovery, Daniel packed a small cloth bag carefully with a few coins, one necklace, and the bundle of old papers. He didn't want to carry everything at once because he wasn't sure who he could trust. The rest of the treasure stayed hidden under their bed, tucked away inside the chest. Sam watched with wide eyes as his father tied the bag securely. "Where are you going, Dad?" the boy asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Daniel placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder.
I'm going to find someone who knows about these things.
We need to know what they are, where they came from, and if they mean anything. Sam's imagination lit up again. What if they say it's worth a lot of money? What if we're rich? Daniel smiled but kept his tone steady. We'll see, son. Sometimes things look valuable but are not. We must be patient. He left the cabin and walked into town with a mixture of hope and caution. His steps felt heavy, as though each one carried the weight of years of struggles and dreams. He went to the small antique shop on the main street, run by an elderly man named Mr. Harris, who was known for his knowledge of rare items. When Daniel entered, the little bell above the door jingled. The shop smelled of old books, polished wood, and dust. Mr. Harris looked up from behind the counter, adjusting his glasses. Good morning, Daniel. What brings you here today? Daniel hesitated for a moment, then placed the bag gently on the counter. I found some things in the old cabin I bought. I thought maybe you could tell me what they are. The old man untied the bag and carefully pulled out the coins and jewelry, his eyes narrowing with surprise. He picked up one coin, turning it slowly under the light. Where did you say you found these? He asked in a hushed voice. Daniel explained briefly about the loose floorboard and the hidden chest. Mr. Harris listened, nodding slowly. Then he opened the bundle of papers and studied them with great care. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. These, he whispered, are not ordinary items. These coins are very old, from a time when this land was still being settled. And this necklace, it looks like it belonged to someone of high importance. The documents appear to be deeds and records from the 1800s. Daniel, do you realize what you found? Daniel's heart beat faster. So, they're worth something? Mr. Harris leaned back, still staring at the items. Worth something? My boy, this collection could be worth millions, but you need to be careful. Don't tell anyone just yet. Bring these to a professional appraiser in the city. They will confirm the true value. Daniel thanked him, his voice almost shaking. He gathered the items back into the bag and walked out of the shop, his mind racing. For years he had dreamed of giving Sam a better life, and now it seemed as though destiny had placed it right under their feet. When he returned to the cabin, Sam ran to him, his eyes shining with anticipation. What did he say? Are we rich? Daniel knelt down and hugged his son tightly. He said, it's very special, son. More valuable than we ever imagined. But we must be wise. We can't rush. We'll take it step by step. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling, listening to Sam's soft breathing beside him. His mind was filled with thoughts of schools, books, clothes, and a secure future for his boy. No more worries about food or rent. No more wondering if tomorrow would be harder than today. But he also felt a responsibility. Wealth could change people, and he didn't want it to change the bond he shared with Sam. The next week, Daniel borrowed a neighbor's car and traveled to the city. He carried the items in a strong box this time, every step heavy with both fear and hope. The appraiser, a well-dressed man in a tall building filled with glass cases, examined the coins, jewelry, and papers for hours. Daniel waited nervously in the corner, his rough hands folded together, his eyes never leaving the man's movements. Finally, the appraiser looked up with wide eyes. Mr. Daniel, he said slowly, this is an extraordinary find. The coins alone are worth several $1 million. The jewelry adds more value, and these documents are historic. If you were to sell them, you could receive at least $5 million, maybe more. Daniel felt as if the ground shifted beneath him. $5 million. The number echoed in his head. He thanked the man politely, his voice trembling, and walked out into the busy streets of the city. The world around him looked the same, but everything in his own world had changed forever. When he returned to the cabin and told Sam, the boy jumped into his arms with joy. We're really rich, Dad. We don't have to worry anymore. Daniel laughed and held him close, tears filling his eyes. Yes, son, but remember this, money is only a tool. What matters most is how we use it. From that day forward, life began to shift. Daniel didn't rush to spend the money. Instead, he first secured Sam's education, ensuring his son would have opportunities that he himself had never known. He bought proper clothes and books for him, and he made sure the cabin was repaired with real material so they could live comfortably. News eventually spread in town about the discovery, though Daniel had tried to keep it quiet. People who once pitied him now looked at him with admiration and curiosity. Some congratulated him warmly, while others whispered about his sudden fortune. But Daniel remained the same humble man he had always been. He walked through town with the same kindness, greeting everyone as before, never letting the treasure make him proud or arrogant. For Sam, the treasure meant dreams could finally feel real. He could imagine a future where nothing was impossible. But more than the coins and jewels, what he cherished most was the memory of that rainy afternoon, when he and his father had lifted the floorboard together. He often told his father, "The best treasure was finding it with you." The cabin that once looked like nothing more than a ruined shelter had now become the center of an incredible story. People who had laughed at Daniel for buying it for $50 were now amazed that it had given him a fortune. Yet for Daniel and Sam, the real value was not just in the money but in the journey, the patience, and the love that brought them to that moment. And as the stars lit up the sky above their cabin at night, Daniel often sat on the porch with his son, thinking about how life had tested them in so many ways. Now at last life had rewarded them, and he promised himself that they would use this gift not just for themselves, but to help others who struggled as they once had. With the treasure's value confirmed, Daniel's life changed in ways he had never imagined. Yet despite the fortune, he remained the same man who had worked tirelessly to care for his son. Every morning he woke up early, not to struggle anymore, but to plan how to use this gift wisely. He wanted the treasure to be more than just money. He wanted it to create a lasting impact for Sam, for himself, and for the people around them. The first thing he did was make the cabin truly their home. No longer did it have leaky roofs or broken windows. Skilled workers repaired every corner. Yet Daniel insisted on being involved in every step. He wanted Sam to see that even with wealth, the value of hard work and effort never disappeared. They painted the walls bright colors, laid smooth floors, and added furniture that was both comfortable and simple. Every detail reminded Daniel of the days when they had worked together to lift dusty boards, to patch holes, and to make a home out of ruins. Sam was thrilled. He had his own room now, filled with books, toys, and drawings he had made over the years. But the greatest joy for both of them was the living room, where they placed the old chest in a safe corner, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a reminder of how their life had changed through patience and discovery. Every evening they would sit there together, often talking about their day, dreaming about the future, and sometimes just laughing at old memories of the days when the cabin had seemed impossible to live in. Daniel knew that wealth could be fleeting if not handled carefully. He remembered his own struggles, the nights of worry, and the long days when he didn't know if he could provide a simple meal for Sam. He didn't want to fall into the trap of careless spending. Instead, he focused on education and opportunity. He enrolled Sam in a good school, paid for extra lessons, and even arranged trips to museums and libraries to expand his son's knowledge of the world. Daniel wanted Sam to understand that wealth was a tool, not the destination. Beyond his own family, Daniel felt a strong desire to help others. There were many families in town who, like him once, struggled with basic needs. Daniel quietly reached out to some of them, offering support with food, repairs, and sometimes small loans that could help them start a business. He never did this for attention. To him, the real reward was the smile on a mother's face when she knew her children could eat well that week, or the relief of a father who no longer had to worry about repairing a broken roof. Over time, Daniel also began teaching others lessons he had learned the hard way. He would invite children and young people to the cabin, sharing stories about patience, courage, and the importance of hope. Sam would sit beside him, listening intently, and sometimes asking questions that made Daniel smile. "Dad," he asked one afternoon, "do you think other people can find treasure under their floors too?" Daniel chuckled. "Not always treasure like ours, son. But everyone has a chance to find something valuable. Sometimes it's knowledge, sometimes it's love, sometimes it's the chance to help others. That's treasure too." The cabin became more than a home. It became a place of learning, a place of inspiration, and a place of community. Children who had never been inside such a cabin were invited to explore and ask questions. Daniel would show them the old chest, the coins, and the papers, explaining how careful observation and patience had led to the discovery. He always emphasized the lessons of humility and respect, reminding everyone that true wealth was not measured only in money, but in kindness and perseverance. Sam grew up surrounded by these lessons. Even as he became older, He remembered the rainy afternoon when he had first found the chest under the floorboard. That memory remained vivid, not because of the coins or jewels, but because of the moment he had shared with his father. It had shown him that love, guidance, and shared effort were the foundations of every great achievement. Daniel often told him, "Son, never forget where you came from. Never forget the value of hard work and patience. Wealth is only meaningful if you use it to build good things." People in the town began to look at Daniel differently. He was no longer the struggling single father they had once pitied. He had become a symbol of hope and integrity. Some asked him how he had done it, and he would answer simply, "Believe in yourself, work hard, and never lose hope." Treasure comes in many forms, and the greatest form is love and perseverance. As years passed, the cabin witnessed countless small victories. Sam learned new skills, developed his talents, and grew into a young man full of curiosity and wisdom. Daniel watched with pride, knowing that the treasure had given them freedom, but the values they had built in the cabin had given them life. They had shared laughter, tears, challenges, and triumphs within those walls. The chest, once hidden and mysterious, had brought them more than wealth. It had brought them purpose and unity. Daniel also made sure to leave a lasting legacy. He started a small fund in town to help other struggling families improve their homes or education. He quietly funded scholarships for children who wanted to learn trades, arts, or sciences, believing that opportunities should not depend on luck, but on effort and courage. And all the while, the cabin stood as a reminder of what could happen when one refused to give up. Even when life seemed impossible, every evening, Daniel and Sam would sit on the porch, looking at the sun setting behind the trees. The cabin glowed in the soft light, warm and peaceful. Sam would ask questions about the treasure, about their journey, and about the lessons they had learned together. Daniel would answer patiently, always reminding his son that the greatest treasures were not coins or jewelry, but the memories, the love, and the chance to make the world a better place. And in those moments, Daniel felt complete. He had given his son more than a comfortable life. He had given him courage, integrity, and hope. The ruined cabin, bought for $50, had become a beacon of perseverance. It had shown that no matter how humble a beginning, a life built on love, patience, and hard work could create wonders beyond imagination. Daniel often thought back to the day he first saw the cabin, broken and abandoned. He remembered the doubts, the struggles, and the long nights of worry. And now, as he watched Sam play in the yard or read by the window, he realized that the true miracle wasn't the money or treasure. It was the journey they had shared. That journey had transformed both of their lives forever. The cabin, once silent and forgotten, now rang with laughter, learning, and hope. And Daniel knew that no treasure in the world could ever compare to the joy of seeing his son grow up surrounded by love, values, and endless possibilities. Years later, long after the treasure had been secured and shared wisely, people still told the story of the single father and his son, the cabin bought for $50, and the miraculous discovery hidden beneath its floors. But for Daniel and Sam, it was never about fame or fortune. It was about life, lessons, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his son, and that, Daniel believed, was the greatest treasure of all.